He laughed at me, not the kind of laugh you share when you've both seen something funny. It was a clean, sharp bark that cut through the afternoon air and left me exposed in the sunlight. We were in the parking lot outside a pharmacy, and I was angled between a yellow-striped handicapped space and a line of shopping carts, balancing a paper bag on my lap. The bag split, 2 pill bottles rolled away, tapping against my wheel. A package of tea slid into a puddle of oil, tinting the cellophane a slick grey. And Ryan, my son, stood there with a grin that curled into something I didn't recognize on the face. I helped Teach to smile. "Want me to push you, old man?" he said. Nods softly. Heads turned. A couple paused, then pretended they hadn't. A woman with a stroller glanced down, then up, then away. A teenage boy snorted and bit his lip like he wanted to keep the sound. But it slipped out anyway. Ryan's keys jangled in his hand as he looked down at me, and he added, "Or maybe put a motor on that thing. We could race." Humiliation is a heat that starts in your chest and spills upward until your ears are burning. I felt it then, hotter than the asphalt. My palms were gritty from the wheel. A rivulet of sweat traveled down my spine, right between my shoulder blades, and I swallowed the words that wanted to climb up my throat. I did what I've learned to do lately. I bowed my head. I gathered the pill bottles, and I pretended not to hear. Before I go on, please subscribe. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I appreciate knowing where you're as I speak my piece. He nudged the toe of his sneaker against my front caster as if he might spin me for a joke, then caught himself when he met my eyes. But the damage was done. I felt 19 again. Except this time I was the one being watched, the one diminished, to a prop in someone else's scene. I could feel my age in every place it had settled, in the ache at my lower back, the tremor behind my left knee that had betrayed me the day everything changed. The way my breath came thin and quick when I needed it to be deep. My chair squeaked because there was a thread wound tight round the axle. I'd meant to clear it. I hadn't. I saw us reflected in the side of a minivan, me with my white eyebrows like gull's wings and my blue eyes washed pale, the small notch in my left ear from a childhood fight, the stubborn swirl of hair that never learned to lie flat even when it turned silver. Ryan next to me, tall, sturdy, jawline I once thought made him look princely. His mouth moved again, forming another quip I knew I wouldn't like. But he caught the look on my face and turned it into a cough, as if he could clear away the sound. He'd already thrown into the day. "It's fine," I said, though no one had asked. Being a father often trains you to fill awkward silences with something that sounds like a bridge. I tucked the tea back on my lap, damp and ruined, and pushed my rims. Right hand then left, right then left, a metronome of escape. He walked beside me in that absent-minded way that says you're part of someone's life, but not part of their attention. He scrolled his phone with his free thumb. The laugh still hung above us like a bell that had been struck, humming after the hammer's gone. When I reached the curb cut, he stepped ahead to hold the door, exaggerated chivalry that only made it worse. "There you go, Dad," he said, too loud. "After you. If kindness can be done with a sneer." We had found it. I tilted my front casters over the seam of the threshold. The bell chimed and the perfume of air conditioning washed over me. I took a breath and found my spine again. I reminded myself that I am not my chair, just as a sailor is not his ship. The thing that carries you isn't the same as the thing you are. On the way back out, bag replaced and my temper caged. He said, "You've got to admit it's a little funny," as if inviting me to join a joke would make me less of its butt. I looked up at him and saw a boy who used to sleep in the crook of my arm, who used to believe my shoulders were made of the same stuff as door frames. I saw the gap between then and now like a new road I hadn't agreed to travel. I didn't let the words come. I let the silence do its slow, patient work. He misread it as surrender. That suited me. I have survived more by quiet than by retort. Outside, the sun made a silver coin of every windshield, and I felt something inside me settle into place with a click so soft even I barely heard it. I rolled forward, felt the push through my palms, and decided on a thing I would not yet name. Some plants grew better in the shade, at least until they are tall enough to stand in the light. At my car, no. At his, because he'd insisted on driving me, as if that took away the sting of how he'd walk me through a swarm of eyes. I paused. He popped the trunk with a flick, and I transferred with the practiced glide of someone who has made friends with angles. He lifted the chair in with both hands, face tightening as if it weighed more than it did. You could at least get a lighter one, he muttered. I looked out at the blue slice of sky and thought about wind. Back at my place, he carried the bag inside like it was a medal and set it on my counter with a thud. I'll swing by this weekend, he said, already backing out, and then, as if the laugh hadn't happened or mattered, he added, try not to run anyone over with that thing. The door closed. The house took him in, then gave me back the quiet I prefer. In the stillness, the humiliation didn't fade. It clarified. It became a shape I could hold without it burning my hands. I cleaned the oil from the tea with a cloth I didn't mind sacrificing and went to the window, where the afternoons, like May dust, dance in slow constellations. Somewhere, under all that, a younger part of me opened his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. My name is Edwin Clark. I am 72 years old, and once, not all that long ago, people listened when I spoke. I built houses for a living, designed them, really. I put lines on paper that turned into porches where children learned to whistle and kitchens where families decided when to forgive each other. I liked clean angles and small surprises. A window where you didn't expect a view, a staircase that bent the light just so, before my back betrayed me. I could run my hands along a beam and tell you if it would settle or sing. Before all that, I drove too fast in the evenings, not to be reckless, but because sometimes the day needed a punctuation mark that wasn't a period. I met my late wife, Marian, in a doorway I designed. We had Ryan the year my hair first admitted its age. He took his first steps toward me across a carpet that still remembers the shape of my foot. He played with the wooden offcuts from my studio and made skyscrapers that leaned toward the sun, then fell with a soft knock. When he was 5, I lifted him onto the hood of my old roadster, a British thing that rattled like a drawer of silverware, and he reached for the steering wheel with both hands and claimed the world. He grew. He didn't stop. I am not a small man, at least not in inches, though the chair can make me feel like I am 6 feet even if I stand. My shoulders never got the memo about age. They still ask for work. My hands are my favorite part of me. Veined, nicked, honest. I have a crescent of scar above my right eyebrow where a clamp slipped when I was 30. My nose is crooked from a basketball that found me unready. I was never handsome. I was competent. People trust competence. I did, too. It was not a war that put me in this chair. It was a ladder. I was on the 3rd rung outside my studio, coaxing a wobbly gutter into compliance. When the world shifted 1 inch to the left, my foot missed. I landed wrong. What should have been an embarrassment turned into a consultation, then a surgery. Then a pain that did not ask permission before it spoke. Lumbar stenosis, the neurosurgeon said, as if naming a thief makes him a gentleman. Nerve damage set up a stubborn camp and refused to move out, no matter how politely asked. I can stand with a cane. I can walk across a room. I can garden if. I don't mind the earth teaching me patience. But distances are another thing, and the chair is what lets me keep my promises to myself, at first. Ryan was kind in the way people are kind when they hope a thing is temporary. He fetched. He lifted. He made jokes that tried too hard to erase the fact that we were rearranging our lives. But as months turned into a year and then two, his kindness shifted shape. He became efficient. He treated my time like an appointment squeezed between other, more important appointments. He corrected me when I forgot the new ways to do old things. He sighed. He didn't know he was doing it. Or maybe he did. And it scared him to say why. We used to meet for a breakfast on Saturdays. He'd devour a short stack. I'd pick at eggs. He'd show me photos of the house he was fixing up, the one with the bay window I once told him would be a nuisance come winter, and I'd nod and try not to point out what he was doing wrong. After the chair, he started arriving late and leaving early. He would glance at the door when someone else opened it. He took calls with the volume down, eyes elsewhere. He loved me. I never doubted that. But something in him had started to measure me against a ruler I had not agreed to. The first time he told me to just stay in the car while he ran in real quick, I heard a small hinge creak. The first time he took my wheels without asking and set them in the trunk like an old toolbox, I felt a click inside me that wasn't bone. He began to speak about me like an obligation he was proud to shoulder. I was grateful, but I was also paying attention. Dignity is a quiet thing. You only notice its absence when the room gets cold. Friends tell me I should correct him, lay down boundaries, name what I need. I have done enough naming in my life. I drew the lines of 100 roofs. I know when a frame will hold and when it will buckle. Some relationships can carry direct weight. Others need a different kind of support, diagonals hidden behind drywall, throwing the load where it can be borne. With Ryan, brute force has never worked. What he respects is demonstration. He always did, after the day in the pharmacy lot. The laughter kept echoing. It found me in the kitchen when the kettle whistled. It sat beside me in the morning when the news poured bad weather into the room. It faded when I wheeled into my studio, where sawdust wears the smell of memory, and where my drafting table waits like a friend. I ran my fingers along the flat oak edge of it, 5 feet by 3, and imagined a line I had not yet drawn. The shape of the solution arrived before I believed I would dare it. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I let the idea stretch its legs and walk with me through the narrow aisles of my days. When I turned out the light that night, I saw not the chair, nor the ladder, nor the pharmacy lot. I saw, very clearly, a long, empty stretch of road with white lines stitching the edges. And I felt wind in a place I'd been keeping still. I knew what I would do. I slept like a man who had picked up a tool that fits his hand. The day of the laugh is not the only day I carry, but it is the one that sharpened the others round it. The parking lot was slick with sun and spilled soda, the air a blend of exhaust, lilac from the hedges, and the vague metallic tang of anxiety. I was angled, so I had to sight left round the bumper of a white SUV to see if anyone was coming. Ryan, with his impatience rising like mercury, had just told me I took too long to make small decisions. He said it like a joke, but not as one. He was already halfway through the door when he turned, saw me wrestling the paper bag, and saw the bottom fall out. It happens fast. How a thing you've held becomes a thing the ground is holding. The 2 pill bottles spun like minnows. The tea slapped the pavement with a sound I can still hear if I close my eyes. The receipts fluttered under the car as if making for shade, and he laughed. Reflex, maybe. But then it became a performance. He tilted his head and let it ring out like he was spraying a wall clean with a hose, for a moment longer than it should have been. He enjoyed himself. "Look at you," he said. And language failed him where it needed to be careful. We almost need a pit crew. The teenage boy by the cart corral broke into a grin and looked to his girlfriend, who bit her cheek, then rolled her eyes in a way that meant disapproval for him. Not sympathy from me. The woman with the stroller put a hand on her child's head, the way people do when they're about to move on. A man in a ball cap said nothing, but the corner of his mouth ticked upward and then back. It's the small reactions that stick. Kindness is warm, but cruelty leaves a frost. I gathered my things with the absurd dignity of someone who knows each movement is being scored, and I put the bottles on my lap and smoothed the ruined tea like a shirt I might still wear. "You've always liked speed," he said, as if the memory of my youth was permission. The irony didn't amuse me. I could have told him all the reasons he was wrong. I could have reminded him how I carried him for 12 hours straight when he had the flu and would only sleep on my chest. How I once drove through a snowstorm to hear him play trumpet badly and clap as if angels had descended. How I swallowed my pride when he told me he was leaving school because experience is the better teacher. Dad, I could have thrown those back at him like stones I didn't want to hold. But a man learns when to keep a stone in his pocket, too, and when to wait for his moment to build with it instead. Inside, we bought replacement tea. He seemed irritated by the time it took the cashier to find the price, as if patience were a resource he was wasting on my account. He paid. He would tell people he took care of me. I'm sure he does, in the ways he knows how. A father has to hold to truths in his head sometimes, that the boy he raised has grown into someone he's proud of, and that the man he became has blind spots where the boy once had dreams. When we reached the car, he performed the ritual of picking up the chair with that theatrical exhale that men use when something is heavier than it looks. He fitted into the trunk with a problem-solver's satisfaction. He closed it with a slap. "There," he said. "Easy." It wasn't easy for me, but it was done. On the drive to my house, he spoke about a barbecue he was organizing for the following weekend. "We are all bringing our cars," he said with the same gusto that once described Halloween costumes. "I've been fixing up the truck. Got new tires, finally. You'll like it." He glanced at me, measuring whether I'd be enthused appropriately. "You can sit with Mom's old lawn chair under the tree," he offered, as if the thought of shade were a prize. "Sounds nice," I said, and tucked that detail away. He was inviting me into a ring where he expected me to watch, at home, after he left. I rolled into my studio and opened the drawer where I keep things that still matter. Inside was the brochure for a Porsche I had once let myself take from a dealership as if I was serious. It was years old, the edges soft from being read too many times. The car on the cover was a color I can only describe as a storm that chose to be beautiful instead of breaking. I had never driven that exact car, but I had driven the idea of it in my mind on rain-slick nights until I slept. I put the brochure on my drafting table and took in the way the curve of the fender caught a false light even on paper. The possibility that had seemed foolish in the morning looked like a plan by dusk. The problem was obvious. My back, the chair, the fact that door sills on sports cars are insults to knees like mine. The solution, as any designer will tell you, is to embrace constraints until they become features. I started with the limits. I researched hand controls. Turns out you can drive almost anything with the right lever and some will. I called a specialist who spoke to me like an equal and not a patient. I asked honest questions about getting in and out, about transfer, boards, about seat heights and door arcs. I wrote notes in tidy lines, old habits of clarity surfacing like a song you haven't heard in years and still know the words to. If I could not run, I could still fly, just closer to the ground. That night, I fell asleep with the brochure on my chest and the quiet satisfaction of a man who has chosen. I did not dream of Ryan's laugh. I dreamed of engine note sustained, living thing that stretches a moment until it holds something like prayer. I woke knowing the shape of the day ahead. I have never been rich. But architecture paid decently if you weren't greedy and if you knew how to say no to clients who wanted cheap miracles. Marion and I bought our house when banks were still unwilling to get drunk, and we paid it off early because she liked the feeling of a debt closing after she died. I made a habit of not spending money. The result is a modest stack of letters and numbers that mean I can do a thing I want to do without asking permission from any month that isn't this one. I also own things of value that don't look like much until the right person wants to buy them. In the corner of the studio sat an old drafting machine I once swore I'd be buried with. There's a man in town who collects such declarations, and he'd made me an offer last spring. I called him and offered him the chance to gloat. He was at my door before lunch, running a finger along the aluminum arm like he was meeting an old friend. We haggled for a form's sake and then shook on a number that felt like a fair parting. The machine left with him, leaving a clean square of floor where it had stood for decades. The emptiness felt like a possibility instead of a loss. I went to the bank. Lina, the teller who treats me like a neighbor, told me my balance with the kindness of someone guarding a secret from me. I told her I'd be making a purchase that might alarm the algorithm. She smiled with a mischief I recognized from my own youth and said she would make a note. I called the dealership before I could talk myself out of calling. The salesman's voice was smooth in the practiced way of men who sell things no one needs. I have no quarrel with that. I have, in my time, sold more kitchen islands than families truly require. But this man listened when I told him about the hand controls. He didn't carry pity in his pocket. He said, "We can do that, and then, when can you come in?" The drive there was its own decision. I insisted on driving myself. In the slow sedan I'd settled for, when my back decided. It had a vote. I strapped the chair into the back seat with a belt I'd added for exactly this purpose. Double-checked the knots my fingers have never forgotten how to tie, and took the long way so the roads could speak to me. I watched shadows of clouds race over fields like horses. I saw a hawk pause in the sky as if because I needed it too. By the time the dealership's glass and steel rose in front of me, I had practiced not being surprised by my own nerve. The car was exactly what the brochure had promised and nothing like it. Because paper can't hold the way a panel bends light when you circle it. It was midnight blue, honest blue. Not the blue of youth, but the blue of a late summer evening you've earned. The salesman tried to show me the trunk, the infotainment, the stitching, but I waved those off gently, and he learned I was there for something else. A technician from the adaptive shop met us, arriving like a friend of a friend who'd been vouched for, and we measured. We talked in inches and leverage and the choreography of the transfer, the angle of my shin as it clears the sill, the way the hand control would arc so my wrist could rest without strain. The talk felt like home. I was in my native language again. We took it out. The first time I pulled the hand control toward me and felt the car answer. I understood how people can believe music lives in engines. It wasn't loud. It was articulate. It spoke without stuttering. We weren't reckless. We weren't even swift by the standards of the boy I once was. But speed is relative to what you've lost. 30 felt like a birthday gift. 50 felt like the first time a woman said yes. 80 out there on a legal stretch of empty highway where the asphalt lay like a promise felt. Like a man remembering his name. I thought about my back every second. The car seat wrapped me in a kindness no chair has ever offered. I could feel where the cushion met pain and said, "Let me carry that for a while." We returned to the dealership, and I didn't pretend I needed more time to think. I've spent a lifetime polishing decisions until I could see my face in them. This one didn't need it, I signed. The pen made a sound I wish I could keep. Money is a tool. We pretend it's a mirror, but it's not. It's a thing you pick up and put down and try to use well. I traded numbers for something I could hold, steer, trust. The adaptive shop took the car for a week to fit the controls, and if you want to know what waiting feels like when it's full of purpose, imagine being 12 the week before your birthday, and then imagine you've earned it with scars. I filled the days with practice that didn't need the car, transfers from chair to hard dining chair and back again, 100 times. A therapist I barely knew would have called it occupational therapy. I called it something like prayer. The morning I collected it, the sky cooperated and held back rain. The adaptive technician, a man named Jorge with calm hands, walked me through the motions as if teaching me a dance he believed I could master. Thumb on the lever, fingers wrapped, push for brake, pull for acceleration, lateral flick for signal. He stood outside and watched the first slow circle I cut in the lot, ready to run if I needed him. I didn't. I rolled down the window and told him to get in. And we drove the way to men do, when they have agreed that pride is the enemy of safety. 10 minutes later, he looked at me and said, "You're good." I was not good. I was starting again. We met the empty lots on the industrial road at dusk, when the last workers had gone home and the space between lampposts belonged to anyone willing to share it with moths. I practiced tight turns. Quick stops that respected my back, blind spot. Checks that would make a racetrack marshal nod. I learned the distance between the car's front corner and the rest of the world again. My chair waited on the sidewalk like a loyal dog. At the end of each session, I parked, transferred back with the board, folded the chair with the pleasure of muscle memory returning like a friend from a long trip, and went home grinning like a thief who'd found a wallet full of old photographs. I told no one. This was mine to grow without commentary. I ate eggs for dinner that week and laughed at evening news anchors who didn't know they were lying. I slept hard. My hands, which have measured doors and imagined staircases into being, found a new project in steering. It was all not simply about the car. It was about the way a machine can remind a man of himself. It was about precision, grace, and the inarguable grammar of motion. The day before Ryan's barbecue, I stood in my studio and looked at the empty square where the drafting machine had been, and I felt no regret, only space. He texted me the address I didn't need with a burst of exclamation points, as if excitement could be set to vibrate. "It's gonna be sick," he wrote, because men in their 30s sometimes try on boy words like old jackets they can't quite button anymore. He added, "I'll pick you up." I wrote back, "I'll get myself." There, 3 dots rolled, disappeared, rolled again. "Okay, Dad," he replied, "if you insist." The day of the barbecue dawned with a sky as clean as a washed window. I ironed a shirt I hadn't worn since Marian's last birthday, a blue one. That made her smile and say I was still a handsome devil, which was a lie that mattered because she told it like it was true. I shaved carefully, my eyebrows, which have always done what they want, refuse to be tamed, and I forgave them. I wheeled out to the driveway and saw the car waiting like an answer no one had yet asked. I took a breath that reached the bottom of me. The first transfer of the day took longer. Butterflies are small, but they flap. I slid across the board into the seat like I'd been rehearsing in secret, which is exactly what I'd been doing. I folded the chair and stood it on the passenger side with the practiced rhythm that had made Jorge nod at me. The car didn't roar. It hummed like a choir warmed up not to impress but to sing. I eased out into the quiet street and caught my reflection in a shop window. A silver-haired man with a jaw he had decided to set for himself. Ryan lives 15 minutes away in a neighborhood that is in the middle of deciding what it wants to be when it grows up old bungalows with lists of projects married to clean new rectangles that say efficiency louder than they should. As I turned onto his street, I saw the congregation, trucks with lifted suspensions, SUVs with badges that promise weather and keep mostly to pavement, a few sedans lined like understudies. Men stood in loose circles. Their conversations ranged round fenders. Ryan's laugh surfaced and broke against the side of the house. He had that knack for being the center of whatever he was in. I parked 2 houses down, out of habit more than necessity. I took one more breath and drove slow enough to be seen. They saw me. Heads turned as if pulled by the same string. Even men who don't care for a car's care for surprise. The car's blue skin lifted every eye. I felt their gaze move from the machine to the driver's window. And what I wanted, and got, was the half-second delay as they did the math. I eased in and took the empty slot by the curb across from his driveway. A dancer touching down on a beat you cannot teach. Ryan came forward with the expression of a man who can quite match what he's seeing to what he predicted. "Dad," he said, a question that did not yet believe in itself. "Is this did you?" He ran his hand along the roofline without thinking, like a child petting an animal while asking whose it is. "This yours?" "It is," I said. My voice sounded like it had put some muscle on in the last week. Curiosity fought with skepticism on his face. Skepticism is the cousin of fear in men like him. Curiosity, if it wins, makes them better. "You can drive this," he said. There was no malice in it. Only the surprise of someone who has run into a wall he installed himself. I reminded myself he had loved me once without conditions, and decided to offer him the chance to do that again. "I can," I said, and showed him the hand control with the small flick of my wrist that has become a boast I am willing to own. "Want a ride later?" I added, as casually as one can offer a miracle. He looked over his shoulder at his circle of friends. They were watching with the generosity of a pack debating whether to be impressed. "Maybe," he said, trying on cool and finding it too tight. "In a bit." He gestured toward the grill, toward the coolers, toward the gathering of people who knew him as the man who hosts. "We're just getting started." "We are," I agreed. I took the chair from the passenger seat, unfolded it, and transferred with the economy of movement I'd earned. I locked the wheels, set the brakes, and looked round as if it were any other Saturday. He recovered quickly. "Everyone, this is my dad," he said, as if I were new. This is his. Words failed him again. He settled on, "It's nice, right?" The chorus of approval that followed had the tone of people who measure themselves by how discerning they can seem. I nodded when it was polite to nod. I accepted a paper plate I wasn't ready to fill. I wheeled under the tree and found the patch of shade he had promised me, as if he had arranged the light. He leaned on the fence near me, radiating a relief that the moment had not gone badly. "How'd you even get it?" he asked. "Same way you got your truck," I said. "I wanted it and did the work." He frowned at that somewhere in there. I had elbowed his narrative, but he let it go. Men came and asked questions about torque and trim levels and options they know they should care about. I answered the ones that felt like conversation and ignored the ones that sounded like quizzes. A boy no older than I was when I thought 30 was ancient stared at the car as if it were a spaceship tea. Hat had landed in a yard he mowed, and I liked him for that. When the fire in the grill was right and plates began to travel in arcs from table to hands, Ryan's friend Paul announced a quick trip to the store for more ice. "Who's coming?" he asked. Ryan jingled his keys and said he'd go. They all looked at one another the way men do, when a thing might be dull unless they make it a moment. "We'll make it a run," all said. Back in 5. Ryan pointed at me, reflex flickering back. "Don't try to keep up," he said, half joke, half warning. It was the wrong thing to say, but it was the right thing to hear. I raised an eyebrow, the way Marion taught me to when she couldn't resist being wicked. "I could use some tea," I said, as if the errand belonged to me. "We're out of decent tea." A few of the men chuckled. Ryan shook his head, an affectionate dismissal that made me itch. "Fine." He said, "Come along." "But don't." He stopped himself. "Just be careful." "I intend to be," I said, and slid into the car with less fuss than he expected. Because practice is the part of a miracle people don't see. The engine worked politely. I signaled as if the law were listening. We rolled out of the neighborhood with windows down, and the air brought me the smell of cut grass and charcoal and someone's cologne that tried too hard on the way to the store. I stayed behind him, because it was not yet my moment. He drove, like a man who needs the car to be part of his personality. I drove like a man who knows his personality and trusts his car. We turned onto the main road at a lane that widens to 3 before the grocery store, and then becomes a polite highway on its way out of town. The third lane opened in a clean stretch with trees standing like witnesses. Everything in me stood up. The traffic light at the bottom of the hill went green. Ryan's truck hesitated a breath, then moved. The space before us was empty in a way that asks to be used. I checked my mirrors. I checked again. I signaled. I pushed the hand control not with the violence of a man proving himself, but with the certainty of one who has nothing to prove. The car leaned into the world the way a good sentence leans into its verb. We moved the engine. Made that sound. Again. The one that forgives you for 1,000 small embarrassments you did not deserve. The wind found the open window and wrote itself across my face. As we came alongside Ryan's truck, I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. I smiled. Not the smile that says, "See me now," but the one that says, "I have always been here." His mouth opened, a harmless fish out of water. I lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a salute old men give when they pass each other at dawn. Then I completed the pass. Smooth as a line I draw in ink when the pencil had already found the truth. I signaled back, took the proper lane, and let the speed fall to exactly what the sign demanded. A moment makes itself, but you keep it by behaving as if it belongs to you behind me. The truck's grill filled my mirror for a heartbeat, then fell back. It wasn't a race. It was a demonstration. We reached the store. I parked in a green-banded space not because I had to, but because courtesy is my preferred rebellion. He pulled into Rosa Way. Crooked, as if his attention had surrendered and his hands were guessing. I transferred out, unfolded the chair, and waited. He approached with none of the swagger he'd had in the yard. His eyes were on me as if I were a new species of father. "You," he said, then laughed. But there was no sting in it this time. "You just passed you." I let the words settle between us, on a legal passing lane, at a reasonable speed. with the correct signal and more than 2 car lengths of respect. He rubbed the back of his neck, a boy again for one soft second. "I didn't know you could." He stopped. "I didn't know you would. There are a lot of things you don't know about me," I said, and kind in tone but not in intent. I waited. "I have learned to let the silence pull understanding in like a tide." He nodded, slowly. That was, he searched for a word that wasn't a confession and landed on. Nice. He laughed at himself, embarrassed by his own bad aim. That was impressive, he corrected. There was a murmur of approval in the corners of my mind from all the versions of me who had waited for this moment. "Should we get the ice?" I asked. "Because moments like this like to be rescued by the mundane, so they can live." We went in. The freezer doors breathed out cold. I took my tea with a deliberation that made him laugh again. This time the sound of relief when a knot starts to come loose. At the register, he stood beside me, his shoulder almost touching mine the way it did when he was small and I was shelter. He paid. He didn't announce it. We walked back out. And the sun had shifted, and my chair moved. And he opened the car door without the exaggerated flourish. He asked, "You want a hand?" Not as a joke, not as a test, as a question a man asks another when he respects the answer either way. "I'm fine," I said. I slipped in. He stood and watched for a second with a look I hadn't seen since. He was 10 and witnessed a magician reveal a secret and respect the craft more, not less. Back on the road. He didn't pull ahead. He followed. He let me lead us home. In the yard, after we unloaded ice and story, the men gathered without making a circle. They wanted an explanation or at least a name for what they'd missed. Ryan said, "My dad." Then he didn't add anything, because nothing added would have improved it. He clapped my shoulder. "Not too hard, later." When the burgers had all found their fate and the sun had softened to that forgiving orange. That makes even flawed paint look good. He wandered over while the others argued about sports. "I'm sorry," he said, out of nowhere and exactly on time. For earlier. For the other day. For he swam in a sea of plural sins. "I've been an idiot. You've been young," I said. It made him laugh, which meant he heard me. "And I've been stubborn," added. "About letting you see me as something other than the tallest thing you know." He nodded, accepting the blame that was his and refusing the portion that wasn't. Balance. We were getting better at it. He looked at the car. "It's beautiful," he said, and his voice had the reverence of someone in a museum. "Not a driveway. Mom would have." He stopped, because grief still lives in our house. Sometimes in the bathtub, sometimes on the top step, sometimes in the driveway beside a midnight blue thing with a heart. "She would have," I said. I put my hand on the roof, feeling the warmth the day had left. She told me once I deserved more stupid joy. I argued at the time. "I'm done arguing." He nodded. "Teach me." He said then, surprising us both, "Not how to drive that well. That too but your thing. The patience, the calm. Whatever that is." He waved his hand toward me like I was a tree he was hoping to climb one more time. "It's not calm," I said. "It's choosing where to put my fire." He thought about that and decided not to ask me to draw him a diagram. The best things can't be sketched, only survived. As the light settled and the yard took on that lovely mess that proves a day was lived, I whirled to the edge where grass meets driveway and paused. I looked at the machine I had chosen, and I looked at my son, who was choosing to see me as something more complicated than a man in a chair. I felt the pleasure of having passed him without having to hurt him to do it, It's a strange thing, revenge that leaves no bruises. It felt like justice, or maybe like art. You know it when you feel it, and you hope it does more than show off. People will say the car is the point of this story. It is not. The point is the distance between who we are and who they think we are, and how, if you're lucky, you find a clean, legal stretch of road where you can close the distance without breaking anything. I do not pretend I won a war. I do not pretend there won't be days when the chair feels like a verdict again. When the mirror shows me a man whose spine writes complaints in a script I can read. But when I hear the laugh now is laugh, that parking lot laugh, it lands on a different part of me and slides off. It has somewhere to go that isn't the center, later that night. After the last guest had taken the last of the potato salad and the moon had started its quiet work, I parked the car in my driveway and left the engine ticking cool. I didn't go in right away. I sat with my hands on the wheel and looked down at them blue veins, a nick on the knuckle, a life of honest use. I thought about all the lines they had drawn and all the ceilings they had held up. I thought about my father's hands, which knew tools better than people sometimes, and how he would have laughed at me in a way that made me better, not smaller. I sat there until the night took on that depth you can only get when you aren't in a hurry. The truth, in the end, is this: autonomy is a flavor you don't forget. And respect tastes better when you don't have to ask for it. I didn't buy a sports car to fix my son. I bought it to remind myself that my life is not a list of accommodations. It is a thing I still get to drive, inside the limits and sometimes very close to the line. Because the line is where the lesson is. My back is a map with some roads closed. My heart still knows the detours. If you are listening this far, wherever you are, some city whose streets I don't know, but whose sunsets I can imagine, do not underestimate a man just because you've learned the sound of his wheels. The chair is not a surrender. It is a tool. The car is not a boast. It is a sentence I finally finished. And the moment I passed my son on a clean bit of road was not an act of cruelty. It was a drawing I made with the only pencil I had left sharp. When I went inside, I put the ruined box of tea, a prop now, a souvenir, on the counter and smiled at it. I heated water and watched steam write its brief poems in the air. I sit, and let my bones talk less loudly than usual. Outside, the car cooled, the night deepened, and somewhere, perhaps in his own kitchen, Ryan told someone a story about his father that did not require pity to be interesting. That was the win. Not the pass, not the look on his face, not the chorus of his friends learning my name. The win was the small shift in the timbre of a son's voice when he says "my dad" and means a man, not a burden. Tomorrow, the chair will be my companion again. We will go to the market, and I will bargain for tomatoes like I used to, with a hunger that has nothing to do with food. I will roll home and make something simple with garlic and olive oil, because living is a practice, and I intend to keep practicing it, and on a day when the weather calls me. I will take the blue car out to the road where the trees have memorized my gratitude and let it give me back the piece of sky I thought I'd traded for safety. That is not defiance. That is devotion to the body that fails and still tries, to the boy who became a man and is still learning, to those left, which may be few, which are precious. If he laughs again, I will know the difference now. He can laugh with me, or he can laugh on his own and hear what it sounds like when it isn't shared. I have no need to correct him. I have shown him, and if sometime soon he asks for the keys and I say yes and sit in the passenger seat, teaching him the dance of a lever and a lane and the patience to wait for the strake before the pass, that will not be me surrendering anything. That will be me drawing another line where one belongs. My life is not over. It is in motion, and that, at my age, is Muthanino.